Hello friends! Welcome back to FoodPrints. I'm so very glad you're here with me today for our lesson called Worms and Compost. This is one of my favorite lessons to teach because I'm a huge fan of worms. They are such interesting creatures and they are so important to our garden. In fact, the big idea we're exploring today is worms help with composting. Now, the first thing you might be asking is, what is composting? Well, that's a great question. And to answer that, I want you to imagine that you're walking in the woods in the autumn when it starts to get chilly outside. Okay, now, what kind of things might you see on the ground?
Leaves, sticks and branches, dried up plants.
Exactly. Leaves, sticks, and branches and dried up plants are all the things we would find on the ground. Well, did you know that over time, nature turns these things into soil? That's right, through a process called decomposition. And the help of our insect friends, nature turns these dead items into this, healthy soil. Well, guess what? We can do something like this too. We can take these same materials and mix them with our food scraps from the kitchen, and over time, make new soil. This is called composting. And just like nature, our composting gets a lot of help from insects, good bacteria, and from our very special friends, worms. That's right, worms are very important friends in our garden because they help make healthy soil. We need healthy soil to grow strong trees, plants, and fruits and veggies for us to eat. That's why worms are so wonderful. They help the earth and us. Now, you're probably wondering, well, Ms. Finneran, how do worms make soil? Well, let me explain. It all starts with that word, decomposition. This is when insects, fungi, and good bacteria, our decomposers, begin to break down organic materials or plants into smaller parts. For example, when organic material, like our leaves and branches, fall to the ground, the insects, fungi, and bacteria get to work, pulling it apart and making it soft and squishy. After that, worms get involved. They don't have teeth, so they slurp up that slimy material and use tiny bits of rock in their stomach to grind up the food. When this plant material passes through the worm's body and comes out of the other end, it's called castings. These castings are filled with good bacteria and nutrients that make the soil healthy, which helps our plants grow. That's what happens in nature. But as we mentioned earlier, we humans can also help make new healthy soil. And when we do that, when we turn our food scraps and other organic materials into soil, it's called composting. There are different ways people compost. Today, we're going to talk about 2 different ways you can compost at your school or at home. The first is using an outdoor composting tumbler. An outdoor composting tumbler is pretty simple. We open up the tumbler and put inside the organic items that we want to turn into soil. We can put in food scraps like onion peels, banana peels, mango pits, lemon rinds, coffee grounds, and tea bags. Pretty much any food that isn't meat or dairy. The only animal items that can go into a compost tumbler are eggshells. You also add other organic items to the tumbler, like dried leaves, dead plant parts like straw, or even bits of soil. Adding these items is how our decomposer friends like fungi, bacteria, and insects get in as well. After that, you turn the tumbler as much as possible to mix everything together and help it break down faster. The next type of composting I want to show you is something you can do inside using a simple plastic bin with a lid. It's called vermicomposting. What makes vermicomposting different is that we add a special type of worm to our worm bin. Take a look here. These are called red wiggler worms. The red wiggler worms are great for this type of vermicomposting in a worm bin because they like to spend their time living right up against the organic material that they're eating. As you can see in our worm bin, the worms are working on vegetable scraps, some leafy greens. Those are all the food scraps we added. You can also see shredded newspaper in the bin. Since newspaper is made of paper, which is made from trees, it can be composted. The newspaper also helps to create the right balance of moisture for the worms. The worms are eating bacteria, microorganisms, and organic matter. The food then goes through their body and comes out the other end. And do you remember what we call that material that comes out of the other end of the worm?
It's called their castings.
Castings, very good. The castings contain all of the nutrients that were in the food scraps. Later, when these castings are added to our garden soil, the nutrients will be the food for the plants. That's what makes worms such excellent decomposers. They break down the things they eat into smaller parts and return all those important nutrients back into our garden soil. Okay, now it's time to use your observational skills. I'm going to ask a few questions and have some of you provide the answers. So as we take a close-up look at our worm friends here, my first question is, what do you see?
I see worms, and they have a light pink ring in their body.
Good observation. That pink ring in a worm's body is called the clitellum. It's located near the head of the worm, and it forms the cocoon for worm eggs. Eventually, the clitellum slides off and forms a tiny cocoon, which you can sometimes see in the worm bin. Okay, our next question is, what do you think?
I think the worms is hungry.
I think so too. Worms are good eaters. In fact, they can eat 2 times their body weight. But remember, they're pretty small, so don't overfeed them. Also, too much food can make the worm bin pretty smelly. Okay, last question as you look at the worm bin. What do you wonder?
I wonder if there's foods that worms don't like.
Great question. Worms don't like food that contain a lot of acid, such as tomatoes, citrus fruits like lemon and oranges, and things like hot peppers, onions, and garlic can also hurt the sensitive skin of our red wigglers. There are also food items we don't put in our worm bin because they make the worm bin smell very bad. This would include any meat like hamburger or a chicken, or dairy items like cheese or yogurt. Here are some things that our red wigglers do like to eat. Bits of leafy green plants or fruit parts like apple or pear cores. Melon rinds are a favorite, and eggshells and even paper. If you are composting with a worm bin, it can be helpful to make a poster like this one and keep it near your worm bin. That will help you remember what to put in and what not to put in. Now you know how to start composting at home or at school. And that means instead of throwing your food scraps into the trash can, you can help the worms turn it back into soil. And next time you see a worm, I hope you remember how important these squiggly wiggly creatures are to our healthy soil here on planet Earth. Thanks for joining me today for this lesson all about worms and compost. I'll see you next time.